They'd done everything right, worked themselves to exhaustion, applied for every loan, begged every agency. But in Joyville's East Side, playing by the rules doesn't pay the rent. Now, with 48 hours until Christmas Eve and $15,000 standing between their families and the streets, Molly and Aaliyah are about to break every rule they've ever followed. The December cold cut through Joyville like a blade, turning breath into fog and transforming the city into two completely different worlds. In the West End, 3-story brownstones glowed with elaborate light displays, mechanical reindeer on manicured lawns, inflatable Santas climbing chimneys, warm golden light spilling from windows onto streets lined with luxury cars. But cross the railroad tracks to the east side, and Christmas looked different. Here, windows were covered with plastic sheeting and duct tape to keep the heat in. Strands of secondhand lights blinked sporadically when the wiring held, and the only thing abundant was the crushing weight of bills that couldn't be paid. Inside Aaliyah Carter's cramped third-floor apartment, where the radiator clanked but barely produced heat, 2 women sat at a scarred kitchen table staring at matching pieces of paper that might as well have been death sentences. The eviction notices were printed on cheap white stock, impersonal and cold, but the message was devastatingly clear. $15,000 by 8 a.m. on Christmas Eve morning, or the Carter and Hayes families would be on the street by noon. Molly Hayes, 25, with honey blonde hair that needed a trim she couldn't afford, and green eyes dulled by exhaustion, read the notice for the 5th time, as if the words might somehow change. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold but from the bone-deep fatigue of working 70-hour weeks at the diner and still watching her younger siblings go to bed hungry some nights. Since her mother's layoff 3 months ago, Molly had become the sole breadwinner for a family of 4, and every week felt like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. "There has to be something," Molly whispered, her voice cracking. "There has to be someone. There isn't." Aaliyah's voice was flat, defeated in a way Molly had never heard before. At 27, Aaliyah was usually the practical one, the problem solver, the woman who could fix any engine that rolled into her father's auto shop. But you couldn't fix this with wrenches and determination. Her natural curls were pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and her sharp brown eyes that could spot a faulty transmission from across the garage, stared at the eviction notice like it was a puzzle with no solution. They'd tried everything legal. Molly had applied for 7 different loans in the past month, denied due to credit damaged by her mother's medical bankruptcy. Aaliyah had spent hours on the phone with every charitable organization in the city, all with wait lists stretching into February or funding already exhausted for the year. They'd even consulted a bankruptcy lawyer, who'd explained with barely concealed impatience that the process would take months, maybe a year, and wouldn't help them now. On the table between them sat a folder containing the evidence of their failure: loan rejection letters, charity referral forms leading nowhere, legal consultations they couldn't afford to follow through on. Years of doing everything right, working hard, helping family, staying out of trouble, and it meant nothing when a slumlord named Ben Gregor decided Christmas Eve would be his collection deadline. "We're really doing this?" Aaliyah's voice was barely audible. Molly looked up, meeting her best friend's eyes across the table. They'd known each other since elementary school, had survived everything the East Side threw at them together, had promised to always have each other's backs. Now that promise was about to be tested in a way neither of them had ever imagined. On the table, partially hidden beneath the rejection letters, sat a hand-drawn map of Miller's Megamart and a timeline for the overnight shift on December 23rd. The plan they'd been too terrified to speak aloud. The plan that would either save their families or destroy their futures. Outside, Christmas lights flickered in the gathering dusk, counting down the hours until they'd have to become the kind of people they'd never wanted to be. #3. 0# is greater than... The planning happened in the dead hours between Molly's diner shifts, when exhaustion made everything feel surreal, like they were characters in someone else's story. Aaliyah spread her father's shop computer across the kitchen table alongside Molly's increasingly detailed sketches of Miller's Megamart, and together they built a blueprint for their own destruction or salvation, depending on how the next 48 hours played out. "The loading dock entrance has the weakest security," Molly said, her pencil moving across the paper with muscle memory from her college days working seasonal shifts. She'd spent 3 Christmases stocking shelves and running registers, back when she still believed a degree would lift her out of the East Side. Now that knowledge was being repurposed in ways her younger self would have found horrifying. "The camera coverage has a blind spot near the electrical panel. If we time it right during the overnight restocking." 2:15 to 2:30 a.m., Aaliyah interjected, not looking up from the alarm system schematics she'd pulled up on her father's computer. Years of helping diagnose electrical problems in vehicles had given her an unsettling aptitude for understanding security systems. That's when the overnight manager takes his smoke break. Like clockwork. I've watched him 3 times now. Molly's pencil stopped moving. You've been watching him? We're planning a felony, Molly. Might as well be thorough. Aaliyah's attempt at dark humor fell flat in the cold apartment. They weren't just after cash that would be amateur hour, and probably wouldn't get them to $15,000 anyway. No, they needed the high-value items that could be quickly converted. The new winter coat inventory that retail buyers would snatch up for half price, the electronic stash stored in the back for the midnight Christmas blitz sale, the premium work boots that construction crews paid cash for. No questions asked. Aaliyah had already made discreet inquiries with her father's supplier connections. The market was there. They just had to become the kind of people who could exploit it. We can do this, Aaliyah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Get in, grab what we need, get out. 20 minutes maximum. That's when Molly's hands started shaking so violently she dropped her pencil. It clattered across the table, and suddenly she couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the screaming realization that they were actually planning to rob a store, to become criminals, to throw away everything they'd ever worked for because a slumlord wanted his blood money by Christmas. I can't, Molly gasped. Oh God, Aaliyah, I can't do this. This isn't who we are. My mom raised me better than this. And we're going to get caught. And I'll go to prison. And my siblings. Aaliyah was around the table in seconds, pulling Molly into a fierce embrace. Hey, listen to me. Her voice was steady even though her own hands were trembling. We're not bad people. You hear me? We're just out of options. We've done everything right. We've worked ourselves half to death. We've played by every rule they set. And it's still not enough. It's never enough for people like us. Molly sobbed into her best friend's shoulder. And for a moment they were just 2 terrified women, holding on to each other in a cold apartment, trying to convince themselves that desperation was the same thing as courage. What they couldn't know was that 15 blocks away in a sleek high-rise office, a man in an expensive suit was watching grainy surveillance footage on 3 different monitors. The footage showed 2 women making careful, repeated visits to Miller's Megamart over the past week, their body language screaming reconnaissance even if they thought they were being subtle. 2 women, the analyst reported, freezing the frame on Molly and Aaliyah standing in the parking lot. Multiple visits, studying patterns. They're planning something. Raoul. The king. Mendez leaned forward, his pale eyes studying the frozen image with the same intensity he brought to every decision that had built his empire. These weren't professionals, that much was obvious from their nervous movements and amateur surveillance detection. These were desperate people, which made them unpredictable, dangerous in their own way. I want to know everything about them, Raoul said quietly. Family situations, financial status. Why are they doing this? Everything. His analyst nodded and disappeared, leaving Raoul alone with the frozen image of 2 women who had no idea their desperation had just attracted the attention of the most powerful man in Joyville. Please subscribe as we discover what Christmas miracle or nightmare awaits Molly and Aaliyah next. The parking lot of Miller's Megamart looked like a graveyard at 2 a.m, vast, empty, and utterly silent except for the hum of security lights casting sickly yellow pools across the asphalt. Molly's ancient Honda Civic sat 3 rows back, engine still ticking as it cooled, while she and Aaliyah crouched behind a dumpster trying to remember how to breathe like normal human beings instead of panic-stricken felons in training. This is insane, Molly whispered, her breath fogging in the December cold. We're insane. This is literally the plot of every true crime documentary that ends with mugshots and 20-year sentences. Shut up, Aaliyah hissed back, though her own hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the screwdriver set she'd borrowed from her father's shop. We've been over this. In and out. 20 minutes. We can do 20 minutes. People say that about gym memberships, and look how that turns out. Despite everything, Aaliyah almost laughed. Leave it to Molly to crack jokes while they were about to commit grand larceny. But the humor died quickly when they spotted the overnight manager exactly as predicted emerging from the side entrance for his 2:15 smoke break, his orange vest glowing like a target in the darkness. They waited until he'd walked to the far end of the building, cigarette cherry glowing, before making their move. Aaliyah's hands steadied the moment they reached the service entrance, muscle memory taking over as she bypassed the electronic lock with the same calm efficiency she used to diagnose faulty alternators. The door clicked open with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. Inside, Miller's Megamart was a cathedral of capitalism. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, aisles stretching into the distance like canyons lined with products nobody on the east side could afford. The midnight Christmas blitz, promotional materials were everywhere, garish signs promising deals that would have crowds stampeding through these doors in less than 24 hours. For now, though, the store belonged to them, and whatever gods protected desperate idiots. Administrative office, back left corner, past the pharmacy, Molly whispered, and suddenly she was moving on autopilot, her feet remembering a path she'd walked hundreds of times during those college Christmas seasons when her biggest worry was getting enough shifts to pay for textbooks. The lock on the office door was laughably simple, the kind of thing that said, "We trust our employees," in a way that was about to cost the store's insurance company a fortune. Aaliyah had it open in 40 seconds, though her hands were trembling again, making the task take twice as long as it should have. The petty cash drawer sat in the bottom desk cabinet like a prize waiting to be claimed. Inside, rolled stacks of bills bound with rubber bands, small denominations, the kind used for register change and minor operational expenses. Molly's hands shook as she counted. At least $4,000, maybe more. "Oh, God," she breathed. "This is real money. This is real money that doesn't belong to us, and we're stealing it, and I think I'm going to vomit." Vomit later. Move now. Aaliyah was already stuffing the cash into the canvas bags they'd brought, her face a mask of concentration that couldn't quite hide the terror underneath. They moved through the store like ghosts, grabbing the high-value items they'd targeted. Premium winter coats, still in plastic wrap, steel-toed work boots in popular sizes, a carefully selected array of small electronics that would fit in their bags and fetch quick cash. Every item felt like another year added to a potential prison sentence, but they kept moving, kept filling the bags, kept telling themselves this was survival, not crime. The store remained eerily quiet except for the distant sound of the overnight crew working in the far stockroom, completely unaware that two terrified women were dismantling their inventory with shaking hands and hammering hearts. 15 minutes in, they had nearly $10,000 worth of goods in cash. They just needed one more score to hit their target. That's when Molly spotted the self-checkout registers, their cash drawers full from the previous day's trading, waiting like a final test of exactly how far they were willing to fall. The self-checkout registers stood in a neat row like slot machines in the world's most depressing casino, and Molly approached them with the kind of focus that comes from being so terrified your brain just shuts down everything except the immediate task. One more drawer. Just one more drawer, and they'd have enough to save their families and get the hell out of here and spend the rest of their lives pretending this never happened. "Molly, we should go," Aaliyah whispered urgently, her eyes darting toward the distant sounds of the overnight crew. "We have enough. We can make it work. We're 500 short, maybe 1,000. Molly's hands were already working the register, using the override key technique she'd learned during her seasonal shifts. 30 seconds. That's all I need. Those 30 seconds cost them everything. The cash drawer popped open with a satisfying click, revealing neat stacks of bills, and for one beautiful moment, Molly thought they might actually pull this off. Then the backup motion sensor, the one that absolutely was not on any schematic they'd studied, the one that wasn't supposed to exist in this section, detected movement in the security-restricted zone. The alarm was biblical in its fury, a shrieking, ear-splitting wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once, piercing straight through their skulls and triggering something primal that screamed, "Run!" Emergency strobe lights erupted throughout the store, turning their neat little heist into a disco from hell. But worse, so much worse, was the sound of the automated security doors slamming shut with a thunderous clang that reverberated through the entire building. They were in a cage. A brightly lit, alarm-screaming, strobe-flashing cage. "No!" Aaliyah dropped the bags and ran for the front entrance, her boots skidding on the polished floor. She hit the glass doors at full speed, hands scrabbling at the seamless surface, pulling and pushing and finding nothing but unyielding security glass designed to trap exactly people like them. "No, no, no! Open! Open!" Behind them, they could hear the overnight crew shouting, confused voices rising in panic and alarm, footsteps running, walkie-talkies crackling, someone yelling about calling the police. The police. Oh God, the police. Molly couldn't breathe. Her chest felt like it was being crushed in a vice, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision as she hyperventilated, clutching the edge of the self-checkout register, like it was the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted sideways into nightmare territory. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. They'd been so careful, so thorough, and it didn't matter because they were trapped like rats in a box, and their entire lives were evaporating with every flash of those goddamn strobe lights. In the distance, barely audible over the screaming alarm, came the sound that marked the end of everything. Police sirens. Faint at first, but growing louder by the second. That distinctive wail that meant handcuffs and charges and everything they'd worked for since childhood dissolving into a criminal record that would follow them forever. "We're going to prison," Aaliyah screamed, abandoning the doors to claw uselessly at the walls, at the windows, at anything that might provide an escape that didn't exist. Tears were streaming down her face, catching the strobe lights like broken glass. "Oh God, Molly, everything we've worked for gone. My parents, your siblings. We're going to prison, and they're going to be on the streets anyway, and it's all for nothing." Molly slid down to the floor, her back against the register, unable to speak, unable to think past the crushing weight of their failure. 25 years of doing everything right, erased in 15 minutes of desperation. The sirens were getting louder. The overnight crew was getting closer. The strobes kept flashing, marking time like a countdown to the exact moment their futures ended. They were cornered, trapped, finished. And then, cutting through the chaos like a knife through butter, came a sound even more impossible than the alarm. The deafening crunch of metal and concrete as something massive smashed through the loading dock door at the rear of the store. The crash was apocalyptic, a delivery truck punching through the loading dock door like it was made of cardboard instead of reinforced steel, the sound of tearing metal and shattering concrete somehow cutting through even the store's screaming alarm. Molly's first coherent thought was that they were about to die, that this was some kind of gas explosion or structural collapse, that the universe had decided merely ruining their lives wasn't enough, and had opted for the death penalty instead. Then came the figures. They poured through the smoking wreckage of the loading dock like something out of a military operation, masked figures in black tactical gear, moving with the kind of precision that made Molly and Aaliyah's amateur hour heist look like children playing dress-up. 6, maybe 8 of them. She couldn't count through her panic, each one moving with purpose and absolute silence except for the whisper of their boots on the floor. "What the hell?" Aaliyah started, but Molly grabbed her arm, pulling them both behind the self-checkout kiosk, as if the flimsy metal could protect them from whatever fresh nightmare had just crashed into their already catastrophic evening. The tactical team spread through the store like water, efficient and unstoppable. They found the overnight crew within seconds. 3 workers who'd been running toward the front, drawn by the alarm, and subdued them with the kind of professional calm that was somehow more terrifying than violence would have been. "Don't move," one of the masked figures said, his voice muffled but clear. "Don't resist. You won't be harmed." Cable ties appeared, securing wrists with practiced efficiency. The overnight workers, to their credit, had the good sense to look terrified and compliant. Molly was trying to figure out if they were being robbed by better criminals or rescued by worse ones when the lieutenant found them. He was an imposing figure, probably in his late 40s, built like someone who'd spent a lifetime doing things that required both muscle and absolute discipline. His tactical mask covered everything except his eyes, dark, assessing, and surprisingly not unkind. He looked at them huddled behind the kiosk, took in their canvas bags full of stolen goods, their tear-streaked faces, their obvious terror, and something that might have been amusement flickered across those visible eyes. Without a word, he grabbed their satchel of stolen goods, the cash, the coats, the electronics they'd spent 15 minutes carefully selecting. Molly made a small sound of protest that died in her throat when he reached into his jacket. "This is it," she thought. "This is where we die. Murdered by professional criminals during our amateur robbery. This is absolutely how we die." Instead, he pulled out a thick manila envelope and shoved it into Aaliyah's trembling hands. The weight of it was substantial, and when Aaliyah's shaking fingers opened it slightly, they could see cash, a lot of cash, more than they'd stolen, more than they'd needed. The lieutenant leaned in close, and when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle, almost paternal in its warmth. "Raoul says your families are safe now." He paused, making sure they were actually comprehending his words through their shock. "Go." "Who?" Molly started, but he was already turning away, barking orders to his team in a language of hand signals and subtle gestures. 2 crew members were already at work wiping down surfaces, rearranging the merchandise they'd disturbed, making the chaos look like something else entirely. Another was replacing the cash in the drawers with mechanical precision. The sirens outside were getting closer. They had maybe 2 minutes before the police breached the building. The lieutenant looked back at them one more time, and this time there was definite amusement in his eyes. "That means move." "Now," And somehow, on legs that felt like water and hearts that were trying to explode out of their chests, Molly and Aaliyah ran toward the smoking hole where the loading dock door used to be, clutching an envelope from a man named Raoul who somehow knew everything about them, and wondering what kind of debt they'd just traded their failed heist for. 2 crew members had Molly and Aaliyah by the elbows, guiding them through the wreckage of the loading dock with the kind of firm gentleness you'd use on traumatized children, which honestly wasn't far from the truth. Behind them, the rest of the team worked with choreographed precision that would have made a Formula One pit crew weep with envy. One masked figure was speed-wiping every surface they'd touched, the cloth moving in practiced arcs that erased fingerprints like they'd never existed. Another was restocking the merchandise with the same careful attention to detail a museum curator might use, returning winter coats to their exact spots on racks, boots back to their shelves arranged by size. A third was actually counting cash back into the register drawers, his gloved hands moving with the efficiency of a bank teller on fast forward. "This is insane," Molly whispered, her brain trying to process the fact that professional criminals were currently unrobbing a store she'd just failed to rob. "This is actually insane. We've gone insane. That's the only explanation." "Shut up and walk," one of their handlers said, not unkindly, as they navigated through the destroyed loading dock door. The team was already forcing the mangled door back into something resembling its frame, using crowbars and sheer muscle to make it look like an attempted forced entry rather than a successful breach. The timing was surgical. They'd just wrestled the door into place when the first patrol car's headlights swept across the parking lot, painting everything in red and blue. The panel van was waiting in the shadows beyond the security lights, side door already open like the mouth of some rescue beast. Molly and Aaliyah were bundled inside with the kind of speed that left no room for questions, landing on bench seats as the door slammed shut and the van pulled away with impressive casualness, like it was just another delivery vehicle leaving an early morning drop-off. The lieutenant sat across from them, finally pulling off his tactical mask to reveal a weathered face with smile lines around dark eyes that had probably seen things they couldn't imagine. The van's interior was surprisingly clean, almost sterile, with nothing to identify it as belonging to whatever organization had just saved their lives and ruined their understanding of how crime was supposed to work. "You were never here," he said, his voice calm and measured as the van navigated through empty side streets. "You understand? Never here. Who are you?" Aaliyah managed, clutching the envelope like it might dissolve if she loosened her grip. "People who noticed 2 amateurs about to destroy their lives for $15,000. He leaned forward slightly, ensuring they were paying attention. "Mr. Mendez doesn't appreciate watching good people get crushed by bad systems. Call it a personality quirk." The van slowed 6 blocks from Aaliyah's apartment, close enough to get home, far enough to maintain plausible deniability. Before they were released into the pre-dawn darkness, the lieutenant tapped the envelope still clutched in Aaliyah's shaking hands. "Count it when you're somewhere safe, and read the card." They stumbled out onto the sidewalk, the van disappearing around a corner before they could even process what had happened. In the distance, they could still hear sirens converging on Miller's Megamart, responding to an attempted robbery that would yield absolutely nothing when the police searched the scene. Inside Aaliyah's apartment 15 minutes later, under the dim kitchen light where this whole nightmare had started, they opened the envelope with trembling hands. The cash was banded in neat stacks, $15,000 exactly as they'd needed, plus an additional $3,000 that felt less like charity and more like a statement. "We know exactly what you needed, and we're giving you more because we can." Beneath the cash was a business card, expensive stock with raised lettering. No name, no business, just a single phone number and 7 words in elegant script. "When you're ready to understand why. R.M." Molly looked at Aaliyah. Aaliyah looked at Molly. Somewhere in Joyville, a man named Raoul Mendez was apparently watching over desperate women who tried to rob grocery stores, and neither of them had any idea whether they'd just been saved by an angel or claimed by the devil himself. Detective Rebecca Jackson arrived at Miller's Megamart at 2:47 a.m. to find the parking lot lit up like a Christmas tree. 5 patrol cars creating a light show that had already drawn a small crowd of insomniacs and nosy neighbors. The store's alarm was still wailing, a sound that drilled straight into her temples and promised the headache that would define the rest of her night. "What have we got?" she asked Officer Wilson, who looked like he'd been roused from a promising sleep and wasn't thrilled about it. "Triggered alarm. Forced entry at the loading dock. Automated lockdown engaged." Officers cleared the building, nobody inside except 3 overnight workers who are scared out of their minds. Jackson drew her weapon anyway, because 18 years on the force had taught her that nobody inside often meant nobody we've found yet. and moved through the store with her team. The interior was a cathedral of fluorescent brightness. Every aisle perfectly visible, every shadow accounted for. The alarm finally cut off as they reached the back, leaving a ringing silence that was somehow worse than the noise. The loading dock door was a mess, bent frame, stress fractures in the concrete, metal twisted in ways that suggested serious force. Someone had tried to push it back into position, but you couldn't hide damage like this. This was a truck or a battering ram, something with weight and commitment behind it. "Cash drawers," Jackson called out, and officers fanned out to check. One by one, they reported back, intact, full, undisturbed. She moved through the aisles herself, examining the merchandise with the eye of someone who'd investigated enough retail thefts to know what missing inventory looked like. Winter coats hung in neat rows, boots organized by size, electronics locked behind their security glass. Everything appeared untouched. The 3 overnight workers sat in the break room looking like they'd seen ghosts, which, according to the overnight manager, wasn't far from the truth. They just appeared, he stammered, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee someone had made him. His name tag read Derek, and he had the 1,000-yard stare of someone whose night shift had taken a hard left into the twilight zone. Black tactical gear, masks, moving like military or SWAT or something. They cable-tied us, told us not to move, not to resist. Professional, calm. Then they just vanished, like ghosts. "How many?" Jackson asked, her pen poised over her notepad. 6? 8? I don't know, it happened so fast. Derek's hands were shaking. They came in through the loading dock after something crashed through it. Then they were everywhere, and then they were gone. And then you guys showed up. Jackson exchanged glances with Wilson. Professional crew, tactical gear, forced entry, but nothing stolen. That didn't track. Professionals didn't smash through loading docks for fun. They came for merchandise, cash, or both. Yet every drawer was full, every piece of inventory accounted for. She walked the scene again, slower this time, looking for the detail that would make it make sense. The forced door, the activated security system, the automated lockdown that should have trapped anyone inside at all, pointed to an interrupted robbery. Maybe the crew realized the lockdown had activated and fled before they could grab anything. Maybe they were after something specific and couldn't find it. Maybe they were just supremely unlucky amateurs who'd triggered every security measure Miller's Mega Mart had and decided the risk wasn't worth the reward. By 5:30 a.m., as dawn started painting the sky in shades of gray and pink, Jackson was filling out paperwork in the store's administrative office while the manager reviewed inventory one more time. Nothing missing, he confirmed, sounding baffled. Not a single item. Even the petty cash is accounted for. Attempted burglary, no loss, Jackson wrote on her report. Forced entry via loading dock. Suspects fled scene before securing property. Store security system functioned as designed. Automated lockdown prevented access to exits. It was neat, clean, and completely inadequate for the nagging feeling in her gut that told her something else had happened here. You didn't bring a tactical team to rob a grocery store and then leave empty-handed because a door locked. That wasn't how professionals operated. But with no crime actually committed, no missing property, no injured parties beyond some traumatized workers who'd be fine after a few days, there was nothing to investigate. The store's insurance would cover the door damage. Derek and his crew would get trauma counseling if they wanted it. And somewhere out there, a team of extremely efficient criminals had just pulled off the world's most pointless robbery. Jackson closed her notebook and headed for her car, making a mental note to keep an eye out for similar incidents, because in her experience, people who could execute an operation this clean didn't just do it once and walk away. They were practicing for something bigger. Ben Gregor's rental office occupied a strip mall space between a check-cashing place and a bail bondsman, which felt like the geographic embodiment of predatory capitalism. The walls were stained yellow from decades of cigarette smoke. The carpet was a crime against aesthetics, and the man himself sat behind a metal desk that looked like it had been stolen from a condemned school building. He was exactly what you'd expect from someone who made his living squeezing poor people for every dollar they had, soft around the middle, hard around the eyes, with the kind of smile that never reached past his teeth. Molly and Aaliyah walked in at 9 a.m. on Christmas Eve morning, carrying canvas bags that felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds each, their families trailing behind them with expressions caught between desperate hope and confused suspicion. Neither woman had slept. They'd spent the hours since the Miller's Mega Mart incident sitting in Aaliyah's kitchen, staring at the money, trying to understand what had happened and failing spectacularly. Well, Gregor said, leaning back in his chair with the self-satisfaction of someone who'd never expected to see them darken his door. The Hayes and Carter families. I'll be honest, I didn't think you'd come up with the money. Thought I'd be processing evictions this afternoon. We have it, Molly said flatly, dumping her bag on his desk with perhaps more force than necessary. Aaliyah followed suit, and suddenly $30,000 in banded cash sat between them and the man who'd been holding their families hostage with a rental agreement and zero conscience. Gregor's eyes went wide, his practiced sneer faltering for just a moment, before greed reasserted itself. His hands moved over the money with the reverence some people reserved for religious artifacts, fingers counting with practiced speed, lips moving silently as he tallied stacks. 15,000 each, he confirmed, sounding almost disappointed that he couldn't find a reason to reject it. Well, color me impressed. Didn't know you broke girls had this kind of cash lying around. We didn't, Aaliyah said, her voice tight. We do now. Sign the receipts. Gregor made a show of processing the payments, filling out forms with deliberate slowness like he could stretch out their suffering for a few more minutes. But eventually, inevitably, he signed the receipts that marked their family's rent, paid through March, homes secure, eviction averted. He slid the documents across the desk, and Molly snatched them up like they might disappear if she wasn't fast enough. Pleasure doing business, Gregor said with a smile that made Molly want to punch his teeth in. See you in 3 months. Outside, in the strip mall parking lot, their families erupted in celebration. Aaliyah's mother was crying. Her father looked 10 years younger without the weight of imminent homelessness crushing him, and Molly's younger siblings were literally jumping up and down like they'd just won the lottery, instead of narrowly avoided disaster. Her mother pulled her into a fierce hug, whispering, I don't know how you did this, but thank you, thank you, thank you. Molly felt like she might vomit. Back at Aaliyah's apartment an hour later, while their families celebrated in the living room with cheap champagne and relief so thick you could taste it, Molly and Aaliyah sat in the kitchen staring at Raul Mendez's business card like it was a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. What did we just do? Molly whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of her siblings laughing in the next room. Who is he? What does he want from us? People don't just give away $18,000 out of the goodness of their hearts, especially not people who run tactical teams that can break into grocery stores and disappear like smoke. Aaliyah added, turning the card over in her hands. The paper was expensive, the kind that screamed money and power. There has to be a price. There's always a price. They sat in silence, listening to their families celebrate a Christmas miracle they didn't understand, bought with money from a man they'd never met, saved by criminals who'd appeared and vanished like something out of a fever dream. Aaliyah's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely audible, weighted with a question neither of them wanted to answer. Are we in the Mafia now? The business card sat between them on the scarred kitchen table, the phone number practically glowing with unasked questions and unknown debts. In the living room, someone turned on Christmas music. Outside, snow had started to fall, dusting Joyville's east side in white that would turn gray by morning. And somewhere in the city, Raul the King Mendez was presumably going about his day, having casually saved 2 families from homelessness and bound 2 terrified women to him with the strongest chains that exist, gratitude and debt. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, and Molly's hands shook so badly she could barely dial the number on the card. 3 rings, then a male voice, professional and calm. Miss Hayes. Miss Carter. A car will arrive at Miss Carter's address in 30 minutes. Don't be afraid. The line went dead before they could ask questions, which seemed to be a running theme with Raul Mendez and his organization. The car was a sleek black sedan that looked like it cost more than their family's combined annual income, driven by a silent man in a dark suit who held the door open with the kind of practiced courtesy that felt both respectful and vaguely threatening. They rode through Joyville in stunned silence, watching the city transform from the East Side's cramped poverty to the West End's ostentatious wealth, crossing the invisible boundary that had defined their entire lives. The restaurant was called Luminaire, the kind of place where Molly had never even considered applying for a waitressing job because she knew she couldn't afford the clothes required for the interview. It was closed, lights off, except for a soft glow from a corner table near tall windows overlooking the city. Snow had started falling again, turning the view into something from a Christmas card. Raul, the King, Mendez sat at that corner table like he owned not just the restaurant but the entire block, which he probably did. Mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that made Ben Gregor's sleazy attempts at professionalism look like a child playing dress-up. But it was his eyes that caught Molly off guard, dark, kind, with smile lines at the corners that spoke of genuine warmth rather than the cold calculation she'd expected from a crime lord. He gestured to the chairs across from him with a slight smile. "Please, sit. I promise you're not in danger." "That's exactly what someone would say if we were in danger," Aaliyah muttered, but she sat anyway. They were well past the point of pretending they had any control over this situation. Raoul laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. "Fair point. Let me be direct then. I've been watching you for 2 weeks. My network flagged your reconnaissance at Miller's Megamart, and I had my people look into why 2 obviously good women were planning something so desperately stupid." "That's not creepy at all," Molly said weakly. "It's absolutely creepy," Raoul agreed without apology. "But it saved your lives. I knew your situation, the evictions, Ben Gregor's Christmas Eve deadline, your family's struggles. I knew you'd worked every legal avenue and found nothing but closed doors." He leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "I couldn't let 2 hardworking women destroy their futures because a parasite like Gregor chose Christmas as his deadline for maximum cruelty." "Why?" Aaliyah's voice cracked on the word. "Why do you care? People like us don't matter to people like you." Something flickered across Raoul's face, old pain, carefully contained. "Christmas is my favorite holiday," he said quietly. "My grandmother raised me in poverty, not far from where you live now. She cleaned houses, took in laundry, did whatever she could to keep us fed. And every Christmas, somehow, she made miracles happen. Small ones, a real tree, presents wrapped in newspaper, a meal that felt like abundance even though it was just chicken and rice." He pulled out a tablet, pulled up a spreadsheet, and turned it to face them. Rows and rows of transactions, each one marked with an address in the East Side, each one for exactly the amount needed to clear eviction notices. 47 families, Raoul said, all facing evictions between Christmas Eve and New Year's. All paid anonymously through shell corporations my lawyers have been setting up for weeks. Your families weren't the only ones Ben Gregor was terrorizing with holiday deadlines. Molly felt tears burning her eyes. "We don't understand. What do we owe you?" Aaliyah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "There's always a price. What's ours?" Raoul smiled, sad and genuine. "You owe me nothing. You remind me of my younger sisters, good people backed into corners by a system designed to crush you. Consider this a Christmas gift from someone who understands what it means to be helpless." He stood, buttoning his jacket with easy grace. "You're good people. Stay that way. The world needs people like you, ones who'll fight for the people they love, even when it costs everything." He was halfway to the door when Molly found her voice. "Why do they call you the king?" Raoul turned back, and his smile widened into something more complex. Pride, sadness, acceptance. "Because in the East Side, someone has to protect the people the system abandoned. Sometimes angels wear crowns instead of halos." They watched his car pull away into the snowy Christmas morning, carrying the most powerful and feared man in Joyville back to whatever world he inhabited when he wasn't saving desperate families from homelessness. The restaurant manager appeared, setting down 2 cups of expensive coffee and a bag of pastries, compliments of Mr. Mendez, then disappeared like another ghost in this increasingly surreal Christmas miracle. "Did that actually just happen?" Molly asked. "I think we just met the Mafia Santa Claus," Aaliyah replied. And despite everything, the terror, the confusion, the weight of knowing they'd been saved by someone the entire city feared, they both started laughing, the kind of hysterical relief that comes from surviving something you never expected to walk away from. Christmas had been saved not through their desperate crime, but through the mercy of a man who saw his own past in their present struggle. They'd learned that angels really do wear unexpected faces, that morality lives in shades of gray rather than black and white, and that sometimes the most powerful thing someone can do is show compassion when the world expects ruthlessness. Outside, Joyville's East Side was waking up to a Christmas morning, where 47 families would discover their eviction, notices mysteriously resolved, their impossible debts erased by anonymous benefactors, their children safe and warm in homes they thought they'd lost. And somewhere in the city, Raoul the King Mendez was probably having coffee with his grandmother's picture, making sure she knew he was still making miracles happen, one Christmas at a time. Did this Christmas miracle touch your heart? Like and share this story to spread the message that mercy and redemption can come from the most unexpected places. Please subscribe for more stories. Thank you.